Do you believe the dead still protect us from the living? 8 hours before putting on my wedding dress, I thought I was stepping into a fairy tale. In reality, I was unlocking a meticulously designed prison. If a warning from the other side had not woken me before dawn, I would have lost everything. Listen closely. The scariest monsters do not hide under beds. They wear tailored suits and smile at you from the altar. Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. I want to speak to you honestly for a moment. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating, which means we are forced to stop uploading new videos here for the foreseeable future and will transition our work entirely over to Patreon. If you find today's story captivating, please support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel to hear exclusive, true stories that are even better, much longer in duration, and feature detailed situations that we simply cannot make public on YouTube, all brought to life by multiple emotional voice actors in a single tale. You can join our community right now by scanning the QR code for our Patreon page on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link located in the description or the comments section of this video. Now, let us step into the shadows of today's tale, where I, Mabel Richards, will show you the exact moment my seemingly flawless reality began to violently unravel. At 32 years of age, I had constructed my life with the exact same calculating precision that I applied to my structural blueprints. As the chief architect at Vanguard Horizon Designs, I had spent the last 10 years pouring my absolute soul into sustainable infrastructure, a relentless dedication that had just culminated in securing a revolutionary eco-friendly building material patent valued at millions of dollars. On top of that monumental professional triumph, I was the sole owner of a prime, highly coveted piece of commercial real estate right in the heart of the city. It was a generous final gift from my beloved Aunt Clara, left to me before her passing. Every single pillar of my existence was perfectly measured, perfectly angled, and perfectly secure. The crown jewel of this perfect life was Julian. Julian Prescott was a charming, high-profile venture capitalist who had swept into my world like a flawless cinematic romance. He was attentive to a fault, spoiling me with lavish affection, constantly ensuring I felt protected, cherished, and entirely worshipped. In exactly 8 hours, I was supposed to walk down a rose-covered aisle and bind my perfectly structured life to his forever. My breathtaking gown, made of imported silk, was hanging on the closet door. My vows were handwritten on heavy cardstock. I truly believed I had achieved the ultimate happily ever after. Then came the dream. At exactly 3:15 in the morning, the temperature in my bedroom seemed to plummet to freezing. I slipped into a nightmare so violently vivid that it completely shattered the boundary between the subconscious and waking reality. I found myself standing in a sterile, pitch-white room. The air was heavy, smelling intensely of formaldehyde and old lavender. Suddenly, Aunt Clara was standing right in front of me. It had been exactly 1 year since a brutal illness took her from this world. Yet there she stood, wearing the exact same pale blue dress we had buried her in. But she was not resting in peace. Her face was twisted into a horrific mask of absolute, unadulterated panic. She lunged forward, her pale hands slamming violently against a drafting table that materialized out of thin air between us. Pinned under her decaying fingers was the architectural blueprint of my wedding venue. She locked her hollow, frantic eyes onto mine, her voice echoing with a bone-chilling urgency that seemed to vibrate directly inside my own skull. "Cancel the wedding right now. Wake up before dawn. Go to his mother's house. You will understand everything." The precise moment the last word left her lips, the edges of the blueprint sparked. Within a fraction of a second, the entire room erupted into blinding, roaring flames, consuming the paper, consuming her, and rapidly closing in on me. I jolted awake with a violent gasp, tearing myself from the nightmare. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and my skin was drenched in a thick, freezing sweat. I sat there in the suffocating darkness of my bedroom, clutching the bedsheets, desperately trying to force air back into my burning lungs. My highly analytical brain immediately tried to take over. I told myself it was just extreme pre-wedding jitters, a textbook psychological manifestation of severe stress and exhaustion. I tried to rationalize that the recent patent negotiations, the chaotic wedding planning, and the lingering grief over Aunt Clara had simply created a toxic cocktail of anxiety in my subconscious mind. But I could not shake the feeling. It was not just standard fear, it was a sickening, gut-wrenching premonition that twisted my stomach into hard knots and made me physically nauseous. The ghostly scent of old lavender and smoke still lingered at the back of my throat. Every single instinct I possessed, the exact same instincts that always warned me when a building's foundation was mathematically flawed and on the verge of collapse, was screaming at me to move. Without turning on a single light, I threw off the covers. I did not even bother changing out of my sleepwear. I simply grabbed a heavy winter coat, shoved my bare feet into a pair of sneakers, and snatched my car keys from the nightstand. I burst out the front door and plunged directly into the thick, blinding fog that blanketed the streets of Seattle at this ungodly hour. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned pure white as I sped through the dead, winding roads. I was heading straight toward the sprawling, heavily gated estate of Victoria Prescott, my future mother-in-law. Victoria was a notoriously arrogant high society matriarch who had spent her entire life looking down her nose at anyone outside her elite tax bracket. For months, she had treated me with cold, polite indifference, but recently, her demeanor had shifted into an overwhelming, almost suffocating attentiveness that I had foolishly mistaken for genuine maternal affection. Now, as her massive iron gates loomed like a fortress in the dense fog ahead, a horrifying sense of dread began to wash over me. I was about to find out exactly what kind of dark, rotten foundation my perfect romance was truly built upon. I killed the engine 2 blocks away from the estate, letting my car coast silently to a halt against the curb. The heavy Seattle fog clung to the windshield like a damp shroud, masking my approach. I pulled my collar up against the biting cold and moved on foot toward the massive wrought iron gates. The security cameras were positioned exactly where they had always been, but I knew the blind spots intimately. I had spent countless Sunday afternoons walking these grounds, foolishly believing this place would soon be my family home. As I slipped through a narrow gap in the perimeter hedge, my eyes locked onto a dark shape tucked deliberately behind a row of towering, manicured rhododendron bushes. It was a sleek, jet-black Porsche. Julian's Porsche. My breath hitched, freezing in my lungs. Just 24 hours ago, he had kissed my forehead, loaded his luggage, and sworn he was flying with his groomsmen to a secluded cabin 2 states away for his bachelor party. He told me he would not return until 7 o'clock this morning, yet here his vehicle sat, completely hidden from the main driveway, the engine block ice cold to the touch. The first terrifying crack in my perfect reality had just violently splintered. I moved toward the east wing of the Grand Manor, my senses heightened to an agonizing degree. The air was thick and oppressive. I remembered that the side entrance leading into the conservatory had a notoriously faulty latch, a minor defect that Victoria continually refused to have repaired because she hated the sight of maintenance workers. I pressed my trembling hand flat against the chilled mahogany and pushed. It gave way with a faint, agonizing creak. I stepped inside and pulled the door shut, sealing myself within the cavernous, silent house. The interior was pitch black, smelling intensely of expensive floor wax and heavily perfumed lilies. I navigated the familiar corridors purely by memory, placing each footstep with extreme care, my rubber soles making absolutely zero sound against the imported marble floors. As I neared the central hallway, a low, urgent murmur drifted through the silence. The voices were coming from Victoria's private study. I pressed my back completely flat against the cold plaster wall, inching my way closer. My heart thundered against my ribs so violently I feared they could hear it. I reached the open archway of the study and carefully slid behind the heavy, floor-to-ceiling crimson velvet drapes that framed the entrance. I held my breath, peeking through a millimeter of space between the fabric and the wall. "Is the psychiatric power of attorney ready?" Victoria's voice cut through the dim room, sharp, venomous. and entirely devoid of her usual refined elegance. I do not want a single risk when taking over Vanguard Horizon Designs. The board of directors is already asking dangerous questions about our liquidity. Everything is ready. My blood turned to actual ice. It was Julian, but the tone was entirely unrecognizable. Gone was the warm, melodic cadence that whispered sweet promises into my ear every night. This voice was utterly flat, dead, and dripping with ruthless calculation. Right after the honeymoon, I will spike her drinks exactly as planned, Julian continued, pouring himself a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. The dosage will be gradual. By the end of the second week, she will be completely unhinged. Our private doctor will certify she is hallucinating and experiencing a severe nervous breakdown. She will be heavily medicated before she even realizes what is happening. A wave of profound nausea washed over me. I clamped my hand over my own mouth to suppress a gasp. "We cannot afford a single mistake, Julian," Victoria snapped, the sound of her pacing echoing sharply against the hardwood floor. "The federal auditors are circling the firm like vultures. We are mere weeks away from total bankruptcy. Our offshore accounts are frozen, and the embezzlement charges are looming. That girl's eco-material patent is the only asset clean enough and valuable enough to launder our remaining capital through and satisfy the desperate creditors. It will allow us to wash $20 million before the feds even realize we have moved the funds." Julian scoffed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound that physically struck me. "Do not worry. She trusts me completely. She is so desperate for a family she cannot see past her own wedding veil. I have spent the last 14 months playing the perfect, devoted partner. I have suffered through her endless lectures on sustainable architecture and held her hand while she cried over that dead aunt of hers. I have earned this payout. Once the doctor signs off on her institutionalization, I will have full medical and financial conservatorship. Her assets become my assets." Victoria let out a dry, rattling laugh that sounded like dry leaves scraping against concrete. "That stupid girl truly thinks you love her. When she is safely locked away in a mental institution, totally incompetent in the eyes of the law, Aunt Clara's entire plot of land will belong to us. We will bulldoze that useless sentimental dirt and build the commercial center. The zoning permits are already bribed and paid for." A normal bride would have collapsed right there. A normal woman would have fallen to her knees, weeping into the velvet curtains, betrayed and utterly broken by the man she was supposed to marry in just a few hours. But as I stood there in the suffocating darkness, listening to them casually map out the complete destruction of my mind, my career, and my freedom, the suffocating panic instantly evaporated. I felt a physical snap inside my chest. It was the sound of my heart turning entirely to stone. The illusion of Julian Prescott shattered into a million jagged pieces, revealing the parasitic monster underneath. They did not view me as a human being. They viewed me as a sacrificial lamb to save their rotting criminal empire. The grief burned away in a fraction of a second, leaving behind a cold, calculating, and terrifying fury. I was not a victim. I was a master architect. And they had just blindly handed me the blueprints to their own demolition. My hands were perfectly steady as I reached deep into my coat pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I bypassed the lock screen, opened the voice memo application, and hit the red record button. I stood perfectly still in the shadows, capturing every single damning word of their financial crimes, their money laundering scheme, and their sick, twisted plot to drug and institutionalize me. I leaned just a fraction of an inch past the edge of the velvet drape. From this angle, I could clearly see the glowing screen of Victoria's desktop computer, displayed across the monitor, in bold, undeniable text, were the forged legal documents, the psychiatric power of attorney. I switched my phone to the camera, disabled the flash, and snapped 5 high-resolution photographs of the screen, zooming in to ensure the fraudulent names and dates were perfectly legible. I had exactly what I needed. The trap was fully illuminated. Slipping the phone securely back into my pocket, I retreated, reversing my steps with the silent, flawless precision of a ghost. I glided back through the conservatory, out the heavy wooden door, and melted right back into the freezing Seattle fog. The woman who had arrived at this estate was a foolish, blindly in love bride-to-be. The woman walking away was her executioner. The sky was bleeding into a bruised, violent shade of violet as I pulled my car into my driveway just before 6 o'clock in the morning. The engine ticked as it cooled in the freezing air, but my mind was operating at an entirely different temperature. Stepping inside my quiet house, I walked straight into the master bathroom and stared at my reflection under the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights. My skin was pale, my eyes wide with the residual shock of a surviving victim. I turned the heavy brass faucet handle, letting the freezing water run over my hands before splashing it relentlessly against my face. I scrubbed my skin until it was flushed and stinging, aggressively washing away the very last traces of the pathetic, naive woman who had gone to sleep just a few hours prior. The tears of weakness and the suffocating heartbreak were completely gone, flushed down the drain forever. In their place, a dangerous, absolute clarity took root in my mind. I was a chief architect. I had spent my entire professional life calculating load-bearing capacities, analyzing stress fractures, and anticipating catastrophic structural failures. If the Prescott family wanted to orchestrate a demolition of my life, they were about to learn the hard way that I was the one holding the detonator. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, my front door burst open. A chaotic whirlwind of ecstatic bridesmaids, elite makeup artists, and frantic hairstylists flooded my home. The air immediately grew thick with the suffocating scent of expensive hairspray, popping champagne corks, and high-pitched, innocent laughter. I sat completely still in the velvet styling chair, offering a flawless, radiant smile to anyone who caught my eye in the vanity mirror. Not a single person in that crowded, joyful room noticed the absolute, freezing void lurking just beneath my perfectly applied waterproof mascara. I played the role of the glowing, deeply in love bride with an Oscar-worthy precision. Suddenly, my phone vibrated loudly against the marble countertop. The screen lit up with a direct message from Julian. I am counting every single second until I can finally call you my wife. You are my everything. A dark, genuinely amused laugh bubbled up in my throat, sounding foreign even to my own ears. I picked up the device, my thumbs gliding effortlessly across the keyboard with zero hesitation. I feel the exact same way, darling. The guests are going to have an absolutely unforgettable day. I hit send and placed the phone face down on the marble. The dark irony of my words was so incredibly rich, it tasted like copper on my tongue. He thought he was leading a sheep to the slaughterhouse, completely unaware that he had just invited a wolf into his pasture. By 10:30 in the morning, it was time for the final dress fitting. As my closest friends excitedly fussed over the cascading layers of imported silk and delicate lace, I feigned a sudden wave of overwhelming emotional anxiety. I clutched my chest slightly and requested just 5 minutes of complete silence and privacy to ground myself before putting on the gown. The moment they cleared the room and the door clicked shut, the mask of the blushing bride instantly vanished from my face. I moved swiftly into my private home office, locking the heavy mahogany door securely behind me. I bypassed my usual contacts and scrolled straight to the bottom of my phone book, hitting dial on a number I had not actively called in over 2 years. Sterling. He was a notoriously cutthroat corporate defense attorney, a legal shark who specialized in high-stakes white-collar crime, and more importantly, a fiercely loyal friend from my university days. He answered on the second ring. Before he could even offer a standard, polite greeting, I cut him off. Sterling, I need you to cancel your entire weekend schedule right this second, I stated, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. I am sending you a highly encrypted file right now. Open it immediately. I quickly forwarded the audio recordings and the high-resolution photographs I had captured inside Victoria's study. I waited in utter silence for exactly 2 minutes while he reviewed the damning contents. When Sterling finally spoke, his usually smooth, professional voice was sharp with disbelief and immediate aggression. Mabel, where in God's name did you get this? This is textbook wire fraud, conspiracy to commit medical malpractice, and massive corporate embezzlement. They are trying to steal your entire patent portfolio and lock you in a psychiatric ward. I know, I replied coldly, and I want you to completely gut them for it. I want you to contact your deepest connections at the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Commercial Fraud Investigation Bureau. Immediately, I want a complete, inescapable legal trap set up right in the middle of my wedding venue. Mabel, you need to pack a bag and leave the state right now, Sterling urged, his tone shifting to genuine, urgent concern. Do not go anywhere near that altar. These people are absolutely desperate and highly dangerous. I am not running away. Sterling, I said, leaning heavily over my desk, my eyes locked on the sprawling blueprints of my latest architectural project. If I run, they have time to hide the financial evidence and destroy the forged documents. No, I am going to put on my white dress. I'm going to walk down that beautiful aisle. I am going to let Julian and Victoria climb all the way to the absolute peak of their arrogant triumph. And then, I am going to personally kick them off the ledge in front of 300 of the most powerful and influential people in this city. A heavy, lingering silence hung on the line before Sterling let out a low, highly dangerous chuckle. I will have undercover federal agents in catering uniforms roaming the ballroom within the hour. What is your play regarding the prenuptial agreement? Just have the revised pages ready, I instructed, my eyes narrowing. I will handle the execution. Just make sure the federal authorities are waiting for my exact signal. I hung up the phone. I did not feel an ounce of fear. I did not feel a single drop of sorrow. I felt an exhilarating, predatory calm wash over my entire body. I walked back into the dressing room, unlocked the door, and allowed the women to lace me into my spectacular gown. As they pulled the corseted strings tight, I looked in the mirror. It was no longer a delicate wedding dress. It was a perfectly tailored suit of armor. The prey had just bared her teeth, and it was finally time to begin the hunt. The grand ballroom of the city's most exclusive five-star hotel had been transformed into an absolute masterpiece of modern romance. Tens of thousands of imported white orchids cascaded from the vaulted ceilings, catching the brilliant light of the crystal chandeliers. A live string quartet was playing a breathtaking, sweeping melody that echoed through the cavernous space, bringing tears to the eyes of the 300 elite guests gathered in the pews. It was a scene ripped straight from a cinematic fairy tale. But as the heavy oak doors swung open and I took my first step down the long white silk runner, I knew I was walking through a beautifully decorated slaughterhouse. At the very end of the aisle stood Julian. He was dressed in a flawlessly tailored black tuxedo, playing the role of the overwhelmed, deeply romantic groom to absolute perfection. As our eyes locked, a single, highly practiced tear rolled down his cheek. It was a brilliant performance, a masterclass in manipulation. Before dawn, that exact same face had been coldly discussing the precise dosage of narcotics required to shatter my mind. Now, it was a mask of pure, unadulterated adoration. I kept my chin high, maintaining a serene, glowing smile as I glided toward him, my mind clinically dissecting the sheer greed radiating from his dark eyes. My gaze shifted slightly to the front row. Victoria sat there, dripping in diamonds and wrapped in a completely inappropriate white designer gown. Her posture was rigid with anticipation, and a smug, predatory smile played on her thin lips. She looked exactly like a starving vulture watching a wounded animal stagger into a trap. I offered her a polite nod, absorbing her arrogant triumph, knowing exactly how short-lived it would be. The music reached its crescendo as I finally arrived at the altar. Julian reached out, his warm hands gently enveloping mine. He leaned in, his breath grazing my ear as he whispered a sweet nothing. But we did not immediately turn to the officiant for our vows. According to a strict, highly publicized agreement we had made months ago, there was one final piece of business to conclude before we swore our lives to one another in front of the crowd. We had to sign the final, binding copy of our prenuptial agreement. The officiant, a distinguished older gentleman, smiled warmly and gestured toward a pair of heavy mahogany doors positioned just behind the altar. Julian and I, accompanied by the officiant acting as our legal witness, slipped into the secluded private study. The heavy doors clicked shut, instantly muting the murmurs of the crowded ballroom outside. Sitting in the center of the room was a polished antique desk, and resting perfectly in the middle of the leather blotter was a thick, black velvet binder. Julian's eyes immediately darted to it, a flash of undeniable hunger betraying his calm exterior. He truly believed that resting inside that binder was his golden ticket. For weeks, his aggressive lawyers had meticulously drafted clauses hidden deep within the legal jargon, specifically designed to secure complete conservatorship over my assets, my commercial real estate, and my $1 million patent in the event of my sudden medical incapacitation. What Julian did not know, however, was that just 20 minutes prior, while he was busy charming the guests in the lobby, my attorney Sterling had paid a very quiet visit to this exact room. Julian pulled out the leather chair for me, playing the perfect gentleman one last time. "Just a quick formality, my love," he said softly, handing me a heavy gold fountain pen. "And then, you are all mine." I took the pen, my fingers steady and cool. The officiant opened the velvet binder, revealing the crisp, legally binding documents. Julian leaned over the desk, practically vibrating with eager anticipation. He completely ignored the thick paragraphs of text, flipping straight to the signature lines on the final page. His arrogance was so blinding, his hubris so absolute, that he did not bother to scan the preceding page. He did not notice that the formatting was slightly different. He did not realize that Sterling had ruthlessly extracted his predatory clauses and replaced them with a devastating corporate poison pill. By signing that specific, silently swapped page, Julian was not gaining control of my empire. He was legally, irrevocably binding himself to assume absolute, total personal liability for every single fraudulent debt, embezzled fund, and financial crime committed by the Prescott firm. The document explicitly stripped him of any and all claims to my properties or patents, effectively turning him into a financial human shield for his own family's collapsing, criminal corporation. I watched his hand move, the gold nib of the pen scratched smoothly against the heavy parchment. In less than 3 seconds, he scrawled his elegant signature across the dotted line, completely sealing his own doom. He literally tied the hangman's noose around his own neck and handed me the rope. He passed the binder toward me, a victorious, utterly satisfied smirk, pulling at the corners of his mouth. I looked down at his signature. The ink was still gleaming wet. I felt a surge of absolute, unparalleled power course through my veins, without breaking eye contact with the monster sitting across from me. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my own name with bold, undeniable force. I closed the velvet binder with a sharp, echoing snap. I stood up, smoothing the front of my silk gown, and offered Julian a smile so brilliantly cold it could have frozen the air in the room. "Now," I said, my voice ringing with absolute, terrifying clarity, "let us go out there and show everyone the truth about our love." We re-entered the grand ballroom, where the 300 guests were seated, waiting for the officiant to lead the traditional exchange of rings, but I did not walk back to the floral archway. Instead, I signaled the master of ceremonies, a seasoned professional I had secretly briefed just 1 hour prior, looking slightly terrified but perfectly obedient. He stepped to the microphone and announced an abrupt change of schedule. There would be no vows right now. Instead, we were moving directly to the champagne toast and speeches. Confused but polite applause rippled through the sea of high society guests. Politicians, venture capitalists, and the city's elite adjusted in their seats as waiters rushed out to distribute crystal flutes of vintage champagne. I walked purposefully up the steps to the elevated main stage, leaving Julian standing at the bottom, his perfectly rehearsed smile faltering for a fraction of a second. I took the microphone. The heavy, diamond-encrusted chandelier cast a blinding spotlight directly on me. I looked out over the crowd, then locked my eyes directly onto Victoria in the front row, and finally, down at Julian. "Today," I began, my voice echoing with absolute crystalline clarity through the state-of-the-art surround sound system. "The Prescott family has prepared a surprise gift for me, but I think the truth is the greatest gift of all." I raised my left hand, giving a sharp, subtle cue to the audiovisual technician stationed in the balcony above. Julian's brow furrowed. He took a step forward, assuming this was some grand romantic gesture I had planned. He was expecting a glowing video montage of our vacations, our fake smiles, and our hollow relationship. Instead, the colossal LED screen spanning the entire back wall of the stage flickered to life. The romantic pink lighting in the ballroom instantly cut to a harsh, blinding white. Projected at 20 feet tall were the undeniable high-resolution photographs of Victoria's computer screen, the fraudulent psychiatric power of attorney, the forged medical evaluations, the dates, the signatures, and the name of their corrupt private doctor, all blown up for the entire city's elite to read. Before anyone could even process the massive wall of text, the speakers crackled. The soft string quartet was completely silenced, replaced by the sharp, venomous hiss of Victoria's voice recorded just hours prior. Is the psychiatric power of attorney ready? I do not want a single risk when taking over Vanguard Horizon Designs. The audio was incredibly crisp, amplified by dozens of speakers. A collective gasp, sharp and horrified, swept through the ballroom. 300 perfectly manicured guests froze in utter shock. Then came Julian's voice, devoid of any warmth, dripping with calculated malice. Everything is ready, right after the honeymoon. I will spike her drinks exactly as planned. The dosage will be gradual. By the end of the second week, she will be completely unhinged. Our private doctor will certify she is hallucinating and experiencing a severe nervous breakdown. The silence in the grand ballroom became absolute, suffocating, and terrifyingly heavy. You could hear a pin drop. Then, the shock shattered. It was replaced by an immediate, explosive uproar of outrage. The wealthy investors and business partners of the Prescott family did not wait for the recording to finish. They recognized the undeniable truth of a sinking ship. Men in expensive tuxedos violently shoved their chairs back, instantly pulling out their cell phones and furiously dialing their legal teams. The whispers escalated into shouts of pure indignation. Down in the front row, Victoria Prescott's carefully constructed high society facade completely disintegrated. She let out a piercing, shrill scream that ripped through the chaos. The delicate crystal wine glass she was holding slipped from her trembling fingers, crashing against the marble floor and shattering into 100 glittering pieces, the dark red wine pooling around her designer shoes like fresh blood. Julian was completely paralyzed. Every single drop of blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a freshly reanimated corpse. His eyes darted wildly around the room, witnessing the total collapse of his entire world in real time. Panic, raw and unadulterated, finally seized his body. He scrambled up the stairs, lunging toward me with a desperate, wild look in his eyes, reaching aggressively for the microphone. "It is a lie!" he screamed over the rising din of the crowd, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "Do not listen to her. It is an artificial intelligence deepfake. She is already losing her mind. It is a fake." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground, my posture radiating the absolute strength of a woman who had just conquered her own nightmare. I smoothly pulled the black velvet binder from under my arm, the exact same binder we had just signed in the private study. I held it high in the air, right in his face, forcing him to halt in his tracks. "Do not waste your breath, Julian," I said, my voice slicing through his pathetic lies with the cold, lethal precision of a scalpel. "Your signature on the agreement to assume $40 million in fraudulent debt just now is the most real thing here today." Julian's face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. The carefully constructed facade of the charming venture capitalist shattered completely, revealing the desperate, cornered animal underneath. He let out a visceral roar and lunged across the stage, his hands reaching violently for my throat. He never made it. Before his fingers could even brush the silk of my dress, the entire ballroom erupted into a highly coordinated symphony of chaos. Half a dozen waiters, who had been quietly pouring vintage champagne just moments before, suddenly dropped their silver trays. The sharp clatter of breaking crystal was immediately drowned out by the authoritative shouts of federal agents. They drew their concealed weapons and flashed golden badges that caught the harsh stage lighting. Within 3 seconds, Julian was slammed face first against the polished hardwood floor, his arms wrenched behind his back. The sharp, heavy click of steel handcuffs echoed through the microphone that still lay near my feet. Down in the front row, 2 female undercover agents had forcefully hauled Victoria to her feet. The high society matriarch was thrashing and screaming absolute obscenities as the heavy cuffs locked around her wrists. The lead agent loudly read them their rights, declaring their immediate arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, massive corporate embezzlement, and international money laundering. I stood perfectly still, watching the authorities drag the screaming mother and son out of the grand ballroom and into the waiting federal vehicles. The 300 elite guests had completely evacuated, leaving the luxurious space echoing with a haunting, profound emptiness. Through the lingering silence, I heard the steady rhythm of leather shoes approaching. Sterling walked up the stairs to the stage. He did not offer a celebratory smile. Instead, his expression was deeply solemn, carrying the weight of a long-held secret. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his tailored suit and pulled out a thick, aged envelope. It was bound by a heavy cord and sealed with dark red wax. "I was instructed to give this to you only if the trap was officially sprung," Sterling said softly, handing the heavy parchment to me. "She gave this to me exactly 1 year ago." My hands trembled uncontrollably as my fingers traced the familiar, elegant handwriting on the front of the envelope. It was Aunt Clara. I broke the wax seal and pulled out the letter. The final, earth-shattering truth of my existence was laid bare across the pages. Aunt Clara had not warned me from the grave through some random supernatural miracle. The truth was far more grounded and infinitely more profound. In the past, Clara herself had been a silent victim of the Prescott family's ruthless financial predation. Completely swindled out of her early retirement funds, she never had the concrete evidence required to pursue a legal indictment. But she had always known exactly who Julian Prescott truly was. When he first began circling my life, wrapping me in his suffocating affection, Clara saw the exact same predator who had destroyed her. Knowing my stubborn heart and my desperate desire for a family, she knew I would never believe her without absolute proof. So, she used her last days to construct the ultimate safeguard. She intentionally left that prime commercial real estate to me with a highly classified, heavily guarded clause buried deep within the trust. The stipulation was utterly brilliant. The exact moment anyone attempted to merge that specific property into their own portfolio through a fraudulent marriage, it automatically activated a massive federal investigation, heavily prepaid by Clara herself, and executed by Sterling's elite law firm. Tears began to cascade down my cheeks, ruining my flawless bridal makeup. As I read her final words of love, I finally understood the dream. It was not a ghost. It was the sheer power of my own subconscious mind. My highly analytical brain had been quietly cataloging every single one of Julian's red flags, every misplaced document, every chilling inconsistency that I had willfully ignored in the name of love. The extreme stress of the wedding had finally forced my mind to use the memory of my brilliant aunt to violently wake me up. I wept openly on that stage. I did not shed a single tear for the loss of a husband. I cried because I was overwhelmed by the boundless, fierce protection of a woman whose love for me was so deeply profound that it literally reached across the boundary of life and death to pull me out of a burning building. 2 years later, the Seattle sky was remarkably clear. I completely discarded the name of the man I almost married. Standing on the very plot of land Aunt Clara had left me, I looked up at the towering, magnificent glass structure that now served as the permanent headquarters for Vanguard Horizon Designs. The building was constructed entirely from my patented, eco-friendly materials, standing as a towering monument to female empowerment, unyielding independence, and absolute resilience in the architectural world. I stood alone in my top-floor office, holding a steaming cup of morning coffee. I unrolled a brand-new blueprint across my drafting table, the crisp paper smoothing out perfectly under my hands. I looked out over the sprawling city skyline and finally realized the ultimate truth of my journey. The greatest tragedy in life is not having to cancel a wedding or endure a broken heart. The true tragedy is blindly walking into a perfectly designed cage simply because you are too afraid to build your own life. The most flawless blueprint you will ever draft is the one where you finally take complete control of your own destiny. Thank you so very much for listening to this story with me today. Before you go, please let me know, where in the world are you listening from right now? Your support means absolutely everything to us. As I mentioned at the beginning, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, meaning we can no longer afford to operate here and will not be uploading new videos in the foreseeable future. We are transitioning our work entirely over to Patreon. If you found today's story empowering and captivating, please help us keep this community alive by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel. There, you can listen to our very best, longest, and completely exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can easily join us by scanning the QR code right here on your screen, or by using the link provided in the description and the pinned comment below. Thank you for your incredible support. And remember, always trust your instincts.